3, 2, 1. Welcome to World SME Day. I'm Angie Lau, CEO, founder, and editor-in-chief of Forkast.News. It is my great pleasure to lead this next discussion here as we explore really the enterprise use cases of blockchain and how to make it work for one of the most important sectors in our global economy, and that's SMEs. The question that we often ask ourselves, no doubt, as enterprise owners and leaders is, why engage in blockchain? Why engage in this new emerging technology? What do I need to think about as I address or consider even adopting blockchain ahead of doing so? How can one learn about real-world solutions and blockchain use cases for SMEs? And what are the challenges and opportunities for SMEs in 2021 and beyond? There's no doubt all of these questions will be addressed very succinctly with our very esteemed panel of guests. And without further ado, we're very honored to have top experts from Consensys, from R3, from Ant Group, and from BSN to help really steer us into looking at how blockchain enterprise use cases can be highly opportunistic and also really exponential for SMEs. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our panelists. Amit Ghosh, head of APAC, R3. Amit, hello. We also have Charles Dosey, head of Consensys, Asia Pacific. Jett Jiang, Chief of Staff, Head of Business Intelligence at Ant Group. And Tim Bailey joins us. He's VP of Global Sales of RedDate, also leading, that is the group that is leading BSN Development Association. So let us dive in here. Gentlemen, welcome. I think for our audience, it would be great to hear from each of you what you're separately doing in this space and how you view it. So Charles Dosey of Consensys, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Angie. Thank you for having us today. So my name is Charles Dosey. I'm the Managing Director of Consensys for Asia Pacific. Consensys is one of the largest blockchain engineering company. We focus on building enterprise software and consumer software for what we call the Web 3.0. So you might be familiar with software like MetaMask, or some other initiative we have with central banks where we help, for example, the HKMA to bring the Hong Kong dollar and some other currencies on the blockchain. So we have a strong history of engineering for the world of enterprise and a full stack of software to really help with that and reinventing the business for SMEs, looking at how they can collaborate more deeply. So I really look forward to the conversation today.
Charles, thank you. Amit Ghosh of R3.
Angie, thanks. And it's great to be here this morning with my fellow panelists. So a quick introduction of who R3 is. We are an enterprise software company, primarily providing software to enable trust and transparency. And blockchain is one of the fundamental software technologies to enable that trust. In addition, we do a lot of work on the confidential computing space to enable trust when data exchanges are happening. We are a 6-year-old company, 15 offices globally, Singapore headquartered for the Asia Pacific region. So really looking forward to dive deeper into the benefits our technology and the use cases are providing to SMEs.
Thank you so much, Amit. Jett, I'll ask you, Jett Jiang of Ant Group, to share what you're doing in this space.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Jett Jiang, coming from Ant Group. So I'm acting as a Chief of Staff and also Head of the Business Intelligence Group. So basically, I'm focused on the marketing, internal operation excellence, and also some strategic planning for the team. So actually, Ant Chain, now we call it Ant Chain, coming from Ant Blockchain, which we changed our name from August last year. So we starting from experiment labs coming from Ant Group, focused on blockchain and focused on maybe like 3 years on the engineering. and start the industry about 2 years ago. So now we have a lot of industry scenario and solutions for like public sector, like banks, like many others. But I still think this is a very early stage for the blockchain solutions for the market. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jett. But last, but definitely not least, Tim Bailey, tell us what you're doing at BSN from Red Date's point of view. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks for having us. So I'm Tim Bailey. I'm with Red Date Technology. Red Date is the technical architect and is responsible for the day-to-day maintenance and operation of the BSN, or the blockchain-based service network. And the BSN is an infrastructure that we've created that integrates dozens of permissioned and permissionless blockchain protocols and interchain services as a way to bring down the cost and ease of development for enterprises, including SMEs. And my responsibility is to kind of lead and drive the business of the BSN outside of our markets in China.
Those are conversations that are not only robust, but at times probably difficult as well. A lot of SMEs are probably wondering, okay, I've heard about it. I've experienced it. Perhaps I don't understand it entirely. What is blockchain? And certainly if you're an SME in our audience, you are not alone. There are a lot of SMEs still really struggling to understand how to make blockchain technology work for them, to understand how they might use it in enterprise cases. And some might still remain doubtful about this blockchain technology. So in the next hour, we are going to really try to answer all of that for you. So are you guys ready to dive in? Let's go ahead and do that. So first, this is really for the group. What is the promise of blockchain? What is enterprise blockchain, first of all, and how can it transform business? Charles, I'll ask you directly. Consensys being obviously the leading use for Ethereum in enterprise solutions. You're already doing that with the acquisition of Quorum from JP Morgan, and you've really solidified the enterprise solution positioning with Ethereum. What are you doing in the region? What are the, especially when you start having conversations with somebody and they say, well, why would I use enterprise blockchain?
Absolutely, Angie. I think whenever there is entrepreneurs from the world of SMEs looking at blockchain, there is two ways to go. A very technical way, trying to understand the technology. It's a fascinating technology, but people don't necessarily need to know all the gritty details of distributed data and cryptography and all these things. There is a lot of technology today which we use on a daily basis, which we don't necessarily understand. How is Zoom working, or how is your email backend is working as well, is not necessarily something you want to go into too much details. So you come back to the original definition of blockchain in the context of your business, which I think is the most meaningful definition. And blockchain is a collaboration technology. So you never build a blockchain for you only. You only look at use cases and daily challenges in your enterprise operations, looking at how many people you need to interact for maybe shipping a container across the world, or financing an invoice, or moving money cross-border. So all the different operations of your company which are involving different stakeholders and partners. And you look at your flow today and you're thinking, okay, oh my God, I'm sending an email, and then we are signing a document, and possibly I need to send a paper, and I need to rush to the bank. And all of these flows are essentially suboptimal. So then you look for a technology stack which is enabling to connect all these different stakeholders and starting to put things in these flows into business logics, which can be automated later on by a blockchain enterprise software. So don't get lost too much into the technology per se, unless you really like it, but really think of how you can get a new kind of infrastructure which will be shared with your partners. And that's sometimes a little bit of a new territory to explore for entrepreneurs and executives looking at co-building an infrastructure with partners rather than upgrading your server or getting yourself a new PC. It's really looking at the group. And I think that's where the conversation should be starting when we approach SMEs and blockchain.
You know, and you bring up a great point. It really is about the group, and there is no bigger group that really is embracing blockchain than the financial world. And R3, you're really leading that pack as you are providing a lot of blockchain solutions in the financial services industry with your flagship Corda Enterprise. Talk to us about what SMEs are doing in the region. What are the challenges sometimes that you need to address, and how to best explain it to an SME who is thinking, okay, how does this actually streamline and make seamless something that has been very burdensome all these years?
Yeah, look, I think the promise, and to link a little bit back to your prior question as well, the promise really for the SMEs is really about trust. It's really about digitization, actually, at the highest level, then trust, then transparency, and really reduced cost in their operations. I think that's really the promise. And as Charles said, I would agree that most SMEs probably don't have the IT teams to go into either building full-fledged solutions where they bring multi-parties together. They're often consuming technology solutions, right? So when they're choosing an existing solution off the shelf, let's say for supply chain finance, what's the benefit of a traditional technology-led solution versus a blockchain-led solution, right? I think that's the awareness they need to have. So let me take an example of what's really happening, and that would illustrate the benefits which SMEs are getting when they're interacting with blockchain-led solutions built on Corda. So in Thailand, for example, we have a solution built by a company called Digital Ventures. They worked with Siam Cement Group, which is one of the biggest conglomerates there, really to digitize the procure-to-pay process for 5,000 suppliers, which Siam Cement Group had. Now, this process was already happening. It was very paper-based, occasionally digital, but not really truly digital. And then you bring a bank into the mix. What that really does, and Siam Commercial Bank was the bank which came and led this as well with Siam Cement Group. But what that enabled really is, it digitized the entire workflow from the bank to the big corporate to their large suppliers and many small suppliers and the SMEs. And essentially what it allowed to do is then the bank can provide financing to these small suppliers now because they have data to risk assess them. Earlier, they never had data because these suppliers were just interacting with Siam Cement Group in a more manual, paper-based manner, right? So now banks can provide financing. SMEs benefit not just from financing, but from a better view of the data which they have with their primary buyer, which is Siam Cement Group in that case. And really, if you put the COVID challenge on top of all of this, like this becomes even more important, I would say, in the last year and a half, where supply chains have got disrupted, financing has become harder. So really, I think that's really the benefit. So if I go back to the headline, it is digitization. It is really enabling multi-party workflows, and it is enabling trust so that you can get the benefits like financing, like better data, and so on.
One of the most well quoted statistics that I've often used is that there's I believe it was an 80% of global firms are in some shape or form engaged in digital transformation in 2019. In 2020, 100%, 100%. And in that vein, Tim, that's what you're doing over at Red Date with Blockchain Service Network. Whirring in the background is blockchain. And so how should SMEs think about what that experience should feel and look like as they try to think about it for their business?
Well, I think back to one of the points that Charles was making earlier about IT budgets and large enterprise versus SME, and I think we have a similar experience and use case that Amit has in Thailand, this time in China, with a company that we work with there who has built a corporate finance platform based on blockchain that allows large enterprises to work with banks and provide have the banks provide financing to the literally tens of thousands of SMEs upstream in their supply chains who need financing, but they need a trusted way. The banks need a trusted way to look at their information and do a risk assessment of them. And so I think that a lot of the early enterprise blockchain projects are going to be driven by the large enterprises, but the SMEs will interact with them as suppliers or downstream sales partners or channel partners. So I think a lot of the early interaction, again, will be for SMEs being part of a large enterprises network. What BSN is trying to do is bring down the cost of all of that. We have a belief that blockchain now is kind of like the internet in the mid-90s, where it was very expensive to build a website and create an e-commerce business, and it was only when that cost became very, very low that a university student in her dorm room could build an e-commerce business, that it really took off. And so we're trying to do the same thing with the BSN, is drive down the cost so that individual developers and SMEs can actually build solutions in a cost-effective way.
That cost effectiveness is a great point. If it's expensive, it's hard to make that decision to adopt. Bring down the cost, you get scalability for a lot of businesses and you get mass adoption. How close are we to that? And this is for all of you.
I think for SMEs, honestly, I think we're still 3 to 5 years for what I would call mass adoption, right? We're still kind of moving in the large enterprise space from people doing POCs to people saying, okay, look, this POC worked and I want to adopt this. So I think mass adoption is going to happen in enterprise earlier than will happen in SMEs for some of the reasons that I talked about earlier. I don't know. I'd be interested. Charles and Amit and Jett are kind of on the front lines of this as well, so I'd be interested in their views.
I would agree with you, Tim, on a timeline basis. I think we are there already from affordability for enterprises, right? I think whether you use an open source, open core platform, or whether you use a well-supported enterprise platform. Like, for example, Corda has both. So we have a Corda open source for smaller use cases or experimentation, and the enterprise version for enterprises who need call-in support and things like that. So I think what we are seeing is we are there for the large enterprises. I would say the small enterprises will of at least the space we are tackling, financial services, trade, insurance kind of areas. I think the small enterprises will be consumers of technology, right? Many times, as they will buy off-the-shelf applications built on Corda or any other platform for that matter. In occasions you will see an SME build an in-house solution, but that would not be the more common case. But even with Tim and his team, Mr. Ifan, we are building a Corda network in China as well, right? So I think that's to make it far more easier to deploy and build solutions for large-scale SME networks. So I think in some sense we'll start seeing the first steps for mass adoption for SMEs. But I think I agree with Tim, it will take a little bit of time. The journey we started with the large guys 5 years ago is starting to fruition and gain steam. And I think we have to go on the same journey a little bit with the SME industry.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point. I mean, we saw Starbucks, Walmart, Nestle, Facebook, you know, you name it. They all started. It's all started with the big guys. But Charles, I'm curious. You know, are the big guys, you know, are they all engaging, or you know, increasingly are these conversations also with the SMEs, small medium enterprises?
I think blockchain will come to SMEs without them realizing. So if you look at what's happening, and this is what is fascinating and exciting about this space, right? Is you might have an SME as an SME some projects to build on blockchain, but at the same time, your banks and your central bank is also working on blockchain. So maybe SMEs will start to interact with decentralized finance, CBDCs, and consume these services without having a plan yet. Maybe their banks will come to them and say, okay, if you start to process your payments with CBDCs, we're going to reduce the cost, we're going to accelerate the transactions. So I think it's the SMEs and the users are step by step surrounded by the technology, and it's going to come into their life and their operation in a very smooth way. So if you look at the Ethereum ecosystem, which Consensys is really focusing on, you've got today more than 400,000 developers everywhere in the world. It means developers in nations where these kind of skills comes in plenty, as well as very affordable. And there is project also where we help the banks, we help central banks to reinvent the finance of tomorrow. And this modern finance and the smart money, such as CBDCs, will enter into the world of SMEs and probably start to put the foundation. So that's one point. The other point where I really join the comments from Tim and Amit is around the technology. I think when we all started 5 years ago, it was still very much big accounts. Building the platform was something which was really a hands-on process involving smart contract developers and everything. But the technology is also maturing really quickly. So what it means when the technology matures, it becomes much more affordable and easy to start to interact with it. You can start to consume blockchain as a service today. You can start to consume blockchain from your mobile phone very easily. And all this ecosystem plays on the technology. The ecosystem is growing. The money, which is really at the heart of SMEs activities and everyone's activities, is also changing and going into blockchain. And the technology can be consumed in a much more casual way. So it's easier to build also. So I don't think we are 5 years away from mass adoption. I think it's going to come way faster than we think, but not necessarily with the enterprise use case we think, but enterprises will start to use blockchain-based assets in the very near future. I would say 18 to 24 months.
And I think that timeline is, yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Sorry, sorry, Angie. Charles makes a great point. I think when we look at the example that I gave of corporate finance for SMEs upstream for large enterprises, those SMEs are engaging, there are tens of thousands of them that are engaging with blockchain today, but they probably don't know it. They probably just know that they're able to get financing and get their credit approved in 1 day versus a month. And I think that's the way a lot of SMEs are going to get introduced to it, not as, oh, this is blockchain technology, so I want to do it. They're just going to be a part of a network or be a part of some multi-party workflow where things just move faster and more efficient. And they say, well, I want to do more of that.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, most people probably don't know, in the same way that, in a retail experience, you have no idea. You just, things are just getting done.
I'd like to echo that. Sorry to step in, Angie, but I'd like to echo that a little bit. And, we see a lot of the same phenomena, maybe, at a smaller scale, given, nobody's as big as China from an impact perspective, but, we do see similar stuff happening in places like Singapore, Thailand, even Hong Kong, right? So in Singapore, for example, one of the companies we work with right now is building a solution for multilateral netting for money transfer operators. Now, money transfer operators are typically SMEs, right? And this is a confidential computing solution to make sure data exchange happens securely. And the government is really supporting this company through their financial grants and through the exposure it allows. So I think governments, both through the efforts and the technology they build and consume themselves, or through financial support or other support, can really drive change. And it's quite evident in China, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, Thailand. I think many of these governments have really put, I think, digitization as a key pillar. And as part of that key pillar, blockchain is one of the, I would say 3 to 5 top priorities for them. Like you see AI, ML, and cybersecurity as the other pillars in most countries, but blockchain is right front and center. But again, it's not about blockchain really. It's about the value these technologies can provide and the problems you can solve. Sorry, back to you.
No, absolutely. That's bang on. Tim?
I agree. No, I was going to say we see the same thing in China, and I think one of by making it a national initiative, it's created a lot of activity at the government level, the enterprise level. I think we've seen that in other markets in Asia, as Amit referred to. I think it's been a bit more organic in the Americas and Europe, for lack of kind of a tops down push. So I see the same thing.
And so it just there's such a environment of support currently in this part of the world in Asia. What are the let's start with the good news. What are the successes that you've seen so far? What best practices, successes, and why? So I'd love to hear some of the highlights that we're seeing blockchain being put to good use. Jett, I'll start with you. You've just got such a broad kind of with Ant Group and SMEs. What are some of the success stories that you can share?
I think at the moment we see some of the scenario which is very interesting. For example, the leasing solution. Formerly, when some enterprise providing the leasing solution, they have, this is very heavy, right? They have to bought everything in advance and providing the leasing solution. So they have a very huge pressure on their finance, right? So now we're using the leasing blockchain to support this leasing solution. So once you have a purchase order coming from your clients, and then you directly using this purchase order to go to the banks to get the financial services. And also the banks could realize that, all right, actually you are buying some hardware coming from, let's say, Intel or whatever. You don't necessarily pay on that anymore. So Intel will pay that because you are providing the leasing solution for your enterprise. So end of the day, this is not really heavy anymore. So the leasing solution just focus on how to make the customer happy, right? Focus on the client service, not focus on the financial services. So blockchain can connect the dots and be able to provide the trust on this end-to-end value chain. So this is now very successful, and we see so many startups coming to working with us on this part. Major coming on computer, cell phone, whatever. This is a leasing solution. This is very early stage, but end of the day, if you go to some very other industries, let's say leasing for the battery, right? Leasing for the buildings or whatever, then this is more interesting, right? So this is something that we see. So based on the scenario, really based on the scenario, and based on how the including government and also the startups, how they realize the value of the blockchain. So we are also do a lot of this education on the market to see, hey, who is our partner and ecosystem to work on this industry solution together with us. Yeah, this is one of the scenario.
Charles, there's probably so many to pick from, but what do you think is the most impactful success story thus far?
In the world of enterprise, what we see is a lot of use cases around financial services. Why finance? Because finance is a very large industry. It's a very competitive industry where there is a lot of problems to fix and also some budget to fix these problems. So I think that's where we all started with a lot of use cases over there. So you think of finance, but you get also now the support of central banks starting to move money on the blockchain through CBDCs. So at Consensys, we help the HKMA, we help Bank of Thailand, the Reserve Bank of Australia, Banque de France in bringing money to blockchain in the form of CBDCs. And from there is a lot of kind of stimulations from all these use cases in the world of enterprises. Huge use cases which is growing very quickly also is all the business around carbon credits and carbon credit exchange, which is also something which aligns with a lot of government initiatives, should it be here in Asia, but also in the Western world. So carbon credit exchange is a massive use case where you see different parts of the world which will be either positive in credit or negative in carbon credits. And then there is obviously a trade to be done there. So a lot of activities around finance always. But what we see also emerging is some kind of more mass market use cases, which Ethereum hosts very nicely, such as NFTs. So you think of NFTs for arts, but there is also NFTs for all the digital world. The new generation is leading in having NFTs for your video games or virtual assets in video games. And we are talking mass adoption here. And you see a lot of video gaming studio, music producers starting to use NFTs to reinvent actually their business models. And what is interesting is they start to approach using the reach of the Ethereum network. They start to approach new communities and new users. And that's where the beyond the technology challenge and value propositions they bring also a new and fresh audience, which I think is fascinating for the space in general. And one space also which probably will get more and more traction, given CBDCs are coming our way at very fast pace, is as well as the world of decentralized finance, DeFi, which again Ethereum is hosting most of the activity today. And you look at how you can start to work with programmable finance, how you can start to have composable finance as well, and how all these processes in the world of finance get essentially automated through some business logics. So you can start to build much more efficient financial processes or capital efficiency overall. So starting from finance, but starting to reach via the technology itself and all the tools available, new communities.
A lot of impact there. So many success stories. What do you think the challenges are? I'm hearing from this group that obviously there's been great impact, but there's still a long road ahead. As you've said, we're not quite there yet. Tim, from your view, what are the challenges?
I think there are several. Cost is a big one, and cost. There are various dimensions to cost. There's cost of building and maintaining an environment and operating it. There's cost of developers, because blockchain developers tend to be pretty scarce right now relative to kind of standard web developers. So I think there are multiple dimensions of cost. And then the other one is interoperability. I really don't think we're going to realize this world that we imagine of millions of chains, because until we can create it much easier for chains to interoperate with each other. And those are really two of the big goals of the BSN is driving down the cost by creating a shared resource environment on a multi public cloud, and making interoperability easier, so that with the tools that we have in the BSN, the cross-chain services, you can connect two chains with 2 or 3 lines of code in 5 to 10 minutes. With the BSN, you can also train a developer who has no blockchain experience to develop a blockchain application in less than 3 days. So we think it's initiatives like that, some of which we're trying to drive through the BSN, that really solve some of those issues. And one of the SMEs that we haven't talked about really yet is kind of the startup ecosystem. And I think that's one of the most exciting things that I think about the space right now, and about what we're doing at the BSN, is bringing the power of blockchain to, like I mentioned, a university student in her dorm room, a high school kid, someone who has an idea, maybe a crazy idea, that they want to build a network on. But with BSN, they can do it for $100 or $200 US, whereas before they had to do it for multiple thousands of dollars. So it's only when we get to those cost levels that I think we're really going to see the type of innovation that we all imagine.
Maybe if I can jump in very quickly. I think one of the challenge we have in some industries is that some industries are already very mature. There is a very small number of players in those industries. Therefore, the innovation and the space for reinventing themselves is way more limited. So if we look at some industries where there is a lot of competition, you will always find a challenger which will kind of reinvent itself and brings additional value to the table to get an advantage on the market. But we also have around us some industries where they are almost oligopolies. And there is only a few players. In these spaces, you will not see the technology innovation moving so fast. And blockchain is also a good use case, but there is no appetite from these kind of communities. And that's one of the challenges we might see, spreading the technology or the use. Some people have just not yet been challenged enough or capture the value proposition to start to move on.
I think moving from like status quo to any change, whether it be blockchain led or anything else, is always the first biggest challenge, I would say. So I would agree with everybody there. I would echo the challenge for tech talent as well, which Tim pointed out. We build code on Java language, which is very easy to use, but even then, there are 20 million Java developers in the world, but still it seems that they're scarce. So, it's just tech talent is hard. And I think historically, if you think about where blockchain industry started, it was about consortia. It was about industry getting together and multi-party workflows. And really, I think that was a very big mindset shift, right? Like we have for 100 years probably built technology for our own house. We have not built technology with our competitor or our peer in the industry, right? And what is happening is, with the progress of the technology, now this concept is becoming more familiar, but I think the ability to jump on the technology and use it is also becoming far easier, right? So you don't have to think many times that should I work with my peer group in the industry? Like, you naturally see the benefits. And finally, I would also say, I think one of you touched upon the point about the startup ecosystem and the venture ecosystem. Really, and Angie, we announced the news yesterday with your franchise on the work we are doing with MAS-backed AFIN in Singapore to drive CBDC innovation, right? And that's really to
private enterprise,
yeah, and that's really to bring many more players in the space, right? This is like not everything can be done by any one of us alone, right? So how do you drive innovation either through efforts like BSN and what we are doing there, making it cheaper, or working with the regulator and their marketplaces here in Singapore, for example, and driving innovation on CBDCs, right? So really, I think a lot more to be done, but I think a lot has been done, and it has become a lot easier in the last 6 years, I would say. But the next 10 years or next 2 years or next 6 months, all is very, very exciting.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. Jett, what's your view? Yeah.
I think I have a very similar view of with the gentleman's. Of course, the cost, I think that's the most important. This is still quite expensive for most of the enterprises, especially they have not aware of the value. This is the critical stuff. And second thing, I think the ecosystem, let's say the startups, right? There's not so many startups. And also the developers, experienced developers. We did some investigation in China market. Actually, if someone have a blockchain experience for more than 3 years, there's only less than 3,000 people in China. So definitely there's a lacking of the, experience that developers is one of the showstoppers. Once, especially that there's so many startups, they have a very, very high salary attraction for this experienced developers. So normally SME or whatever, they can hardly afford on that. And third thing, I think the scenarios, right? Which area that we getting start first, especially that people don't really care about the blockchain itself. They care about the value coming from that. So this is not so mature at the moment. And finally, I think we see the issue is that, let's say supply chain finance. So blockchain is just the record online, but before that, right? The blockchain, before the coverage of blockchain, let's say we have the fake information on the supply chain information. Then this is purely the garbage in, garbage out, right? So you have to adopt the supply chain SaaS or whatever AI or IoT to make sure this data is correct. So the combination of the technology can make this challenge even worse, right? So I think there's still still a long way to go to make sure that blockchain is a part of these technologies.
Yeah, and we're also starting to see almost a bifurcation of protocols. One is permission chains, and then one obviously is public chains, right? And so they seem to be taking on kind of two different characteristics. Public chains really for retail, cryptocurrencies, etc. Permission chains seem to be something that enterprises prefer. Why did this divergence occur? Number one. Number two, do you see them coming back together potentially?
So more or less we are focused on the enterprise, especially even we using the private cloud to run this the blockchain. So only the government and its ecosystem is using that. So we see this trend that the enterprise blockchain can help, first of all, help them because by the nature of the blockchain, the security issue is not always is a problem, and also the performance could be a showstopper of this solution. So this enterprise chain for, let's say, the private sector of a certain industry is, I think, the major requirement coming from our clients. So, but for other area, for us is at the moment it's not our short-term focus for the enterprise requirements.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I think there are three reasons in my mind why the divergence happened. And in fact, when we started our company, we didn't have Corda. We had to build Corda really to address some of those challenges. So it was cost, scalability, which is performance, and privacy. Right. I think those were the three reasons why we had to build a permission chain ourselves and not use some of the public chains available at that time and the state they were at that time. Of course, things have changed. My view, Angie, is I think we will see more interoperability in the future. I think we will see asset classes flowing between chains. I think we will see benefits of permission coming into the DeFi space potentially at some point. There's a lot of good stuff happening there, but there's a lot of unregulated stuff happening there, right? And if regulated markets have to participate in unregulated excitement, I think you need some bridges, right? So I would say, the industry as a whole is progressing in the right direction. I would say, there will be some use cases where only permission will be valid, and use cases where only public will be valid, public chains. But you'll see many where there's some degree of collaboration, overlap, or bridging in the near future.
I think I agree, and I think another issue is just economics, right? In a public chain, gas fees are typically paid by cryptocurrencies, and so it's hard to imagine a scenario where a large enterprise would want to adopt a public chain in a large way when they make revenue in fiat and they're paying, gas fees on the network in cryptocurrencies and large enterprises need stability. So one of the things we're actually doing in that space is that we have an initiative called Open Permission Blockchain, where we're converting public chains to be able to operate in a regulatory wise way in China by stripping out the cryptocurrencies and making the nodes permission. So I think there going to be all kinds of experiments like that. But I do think there are some fundamental barriers to large enterprises adopting public chains in a big way.
Does that change the characteristic of those protocols, though, from public chain to being working with some structure on a permission chain?
Well, I mean, obviously it changes the cryptocurrency aspect and the public node aspect of it. But there are other characteristics of the chain that would go unchanged. And we've got a lot of public chains who are, close to a dozen who are doing that right now.
Angie, maybe just to complement everyone's comments is, I think at the end of the day, we are inventing the third generations of the internet. So probably what we see is blockchain technology following similar patterns. So the internet started in the 90s with essentially an intranet out of some universities, and there was then another intranet and another intranet, and eventually all these intranets starting to merge. I think the generations of blockchain which are permission will essentially fade out because they commercially are very complicated to make fly. Because you build a private network like a private club, you need to be a member of this network, you need to have a special connectivity to this network, and eventually you predefine the reach and the scale of your business depending on the number of members on your network. And if you look at what the internet is today, the value proposition, it gives you a global reach. So our view is that there is evolutions of the technology over time, but everyone will eventually meet on global blockchain networks. Some of them might be hybrid, some of them will be global because they offer you the reach, but it makes no sense to rebuild intranets. We know where the intranets are today. They are basically nowhere. There is no more intranet. There is privacy on global networks because we need to have the reach. And coming into architectures or technologies which are basically walled garden where you can be invited or not, have some benefits, but over time they will essentially fade and just become the third generations of internet after the first generation, which was really consuming information. Second generation, our social life moving to the Web 2, and the Web 3 being the peer-to-peer interactions and the internet of value. So I think we have to be all patient, but in my view, the history is already written.
So Charles is begging me to disagree here a little bit. So I will, naturally, as you can imagine. So look, I don't disagree that there is more common standards needed. So I would agree that, right? And I think we are in alignment there. I think if you look at internet, there is of course the protocol layer today with TCP/IP, but then there is various business networks or business platforms, whether it be the Google, Amazon, Facebooks of the world, or even in specific industries which exist on top of that internet, which is very private information in many ways, right? So I would strongly disagree that the permission world will fade away. I think the industry definitely needs that common standard, right? And I think that is definitely where companies and platforms will come together. I also feel that we have way too many public blockchains today, and many of them were actually created to just monetize the benefits from a cryptocurrency perspective, as we know, and hence we see the volatility in the industry. But I would say they'll coexist rather than one versus the other, in my view.
This is when we in our biz we say you are speaking your book. So
of course,
obviously from permissioned, and then Charles is public, so it's very clear. It doesn't surprise anybody these points of view. But I think there is a world in which we are in a moment where we are oscillating between the two. There are obvious functions, but Tim, what you're building over at BSN is to actually allow all of these platforms and protocols to talk to each other. And so then what does a world like that look like?
I mean, I think you know, you're right. We're building an infrastructure that that creates opportunities for multiple different permissioned and permission protocols, and we work with all three of the other companies who we have here, with Charles on Consensys, and Corda with Amit and R3, and then more recently we've integrated Ant Chain into our BSN in the Hainan provincial government, which Jett mentioned a little earlier, some of the government services. So yeah, we're creating a platform that enables innovation, addresses the big challenges that we talked about in cost and interoperability. And so what we see is a world of millions of chains, you know, throughout different types of businesses, different types of governments, with those chains being able to very quickly and easily interact and exchange information. And, you know, certainly a world with a lot more developers able to easily and quickly develop on blockchain.
You know, my little guy is 4 years old, but man, I think, you know, when we think about jobs of the future as being undefined for most for most of this generation, I think one definitive job is definitely developer. That is definitely part of our collective future. We don't
we'll get him on the BSN. We'll teach him how to program.
We have just a few minutes left, but I think for our audience, you know, what does that future look like? I think from all of your points of view, would love to hear, you know, what does the future look like? And if you're an SME that is not engaging in blockchain enterprise, what does your future look like as you watch your competitors who are in the next 5 years?
My sense is, I think competitiveness will come from engaging in emerging technologies or technologies like blockchain, but, you know, could be others as well. Like, I think, you know, the benefits which a SME gets from leveraging a blockchain-based solution is, you know, better data quality, you know, better prices for the services they can offer. And in many cases, they can get access to financing, as we discussed earlier in the conversation, right? So I think that will enable companies and SMEs who adopt these solutions to be more competitive vis-a-vis their peers. So, you know, if you're an SME, you don't necessarily need to build something, but you need to find the best solution out there, because there are quite a few right now across the world in many countries. So just be educated enough to question you know, what is the underlying technology, what benefits it brings, and how it scales for them as they scale their business. So that's my view for SMEs.
Charles, put on your Forkast hat.
I guess the same way SMEs has been disrupted by email and now maybe messaging such as WeChat, and payments such as Ant solutions. Blockchain will come also with within their daily life in different ways to just accelerate things which are taking a lot of their time today, as mentioned by Amit.
Yeah.
And I guess to embrace this future, I really want to invite every SME owners or executives to start the learning curve, starting to document themselves about the different blockchains, starting to kind of stimulate or launch ideas of experimentation within the company. It's just about starting the learning curve. Either you start today and you will be ready or more ready when things get more concrete for your business. But just engaging with events, reading about the technology and the ecosystem on Forkast.News, for example, opening free accounts on different blockchain-based services, and joining some initiative. I think it's just about learning, so that when something concrete comes, you're ready to strike.
Look, I'm not gonna dispute that at all. I mean, one of the reasons why we founded Forkast was exactly that. The future is coming, and either it Bigfoots you, and or you are engaged, you understand, and when the tide comes, you're surfing. the future is clear to us. We're reporting on it all the time. Tim, in your view, what is the future in the next 5-10 years?
Tough question, but I mean, I think, like I said, I think that blockchain is really in its infancy right now, and I think, you know, one of the goals of the BSN is to create an environment and an infrastructure where people can experiment and innovate. And, you know, I again, going back to the internet in the mid-90s, I remember, you know, I was in Silicon Valley at the time, and, you know, you just picked 3 companies: pets.com, which sold pet food online, Cosmo.com, which did same-day delivery, and Amazon.com, which sold books. And, you know, if you were to go back in time, it'd be hard to pick a winner at that time. Now, those 2 are gone, and Amazon, the third one, does all of what they do and more. So I think we want to create an environment like that, where people can experiment, where companies can start up with an idea and succeed or fail and innovate, pivot. And so that's what we're trying to create for the next 5 to 10 years.
And that architecture of the future, I guess. And I wanted to leave the last word to Jett. You know, from your vantage point, what China is building and accelerating in this space is really interesting to watch from a journalist's point of view. Where, you know, from your vantage point, what does the next 5 years look like in China? Because what's happening now in China is probably what's going to happen to the rest of the world in the next 5 years. So I'm curious to know, in China, next 5 years, because that really is the future.
Particularly if we were working with SMEs, let's say supply chain finance, if the big names doesn't really jump in or fully engage on this blockchain, then the supply chain finance could hardly work, right? We see a lot of big names will focus on the supply chain finance, something like that. So this will help SME get a better service on that. So we see this true trend that will make sure that the mass adoption for the SMEs would be much earlier. Especially, I think for following area, for example, financial services. Let's say we talk about the leasing solution. Actually, the financial services for leasing solution, right? And also the supply chain finance, of course. And recently, last year, we issued called trade finance. We call this trustable, so that overseas trade can be powered by blockchain. So they get also financial service as well, right? So this financial related service is definitely one of the key scenario for the SMEs, because end of the day, they need to earn the money, they need to survive, right? And also sometimes even the government, they want to issue some tax-free or some coupons, whatever, for this SME. But without blockchain, they could hardly be very accurate to help these SMEs, right? So this is, of course, the very important scenario. We see that once the government and also the big name are in the game, then the mass adoption for the SME could be much faster than before.
Seamless, frictionless immutability and trust. That is the promise of blockchain. And well, you have all fulfilled your promise to the audience today and educated all of us on the future of blockchain. So happy SME Day, happy World SME Day. Tim Bailey, Charles Dossey, Jett, Jiang, Amit Ghosh, always a pleasure to speak with all of you. And on behalf of our panelists, I'm Angie Lau, of Forkast.News, editor-in-chief, and I thank you, our audience, for joining us as well. And we'll see you again soon. And cut.